I was always the one who made everything work. I raised my kids, took care of the house, and ran the errands. Day in and day out, no one had to worry about a thing because I was there. I was there when the world needed me. But somewhere along the way, things changed. People forgot. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like and share this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Now, I'm just a shadow in the corner of the room, an old woman with wrinkles. At least, that's how they see me. I see their eyes when they think I'm not watching. The way they look through me, like I'm invisible, like I don't matter anymore. It stings. It hurts more than I could ever let on. It wasn't always like this. I used to be someone. I used to matter. My son, James, and my daughter, Tina, used to ask for my advice. They used to care. But now they act like I'm a burden, like I'm in their way. I can't even get a simple conversation out of them without feeling like I'm dragging them down. Just last week, I asked Tina if she could help me with some paperwork, and all I got was an eye roll. She barely looked at me as she muttered, "I'm too busy, Mom. Maybe later." Later never came. And it's not just them. It's the world. The grocery store clerk who grunts when I ask for help. The waiter who refuses to make eye contact. They don't see me. They don't care. But one thing I've learned in my 72 years is that I'm not weak. I may not be as quick as I used to be, but that doesn't mean I've lost my edge. I've got a fire inside me, a fire that's been smoldering for too long. And if they think they can walk all over me, they've got another thing coming. One afternoon, I was at Eagles Market, just trying to get through my day. I was standing in line at the checkout when I overheard a couple of teenagers talking. They were laughing at something. They glanced at me, and then it happened. One of them, Megan, a little brat with too much lip gloss and not enough manners, said loud enough for me to hear, "Ugh, old people are so annoying. They don't even know how to use the self-checkout." I stood there, frozen for a moment. She didn't know who she was talking to. They never do. The disrespect stung, but it wasn't new. It was the same look, the same sneer, the same treatment I'd been getting for years. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I had been invisible for too long. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. No more playing nice. No more begging for a little bit of respect. I turned to the teenager, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked at me with a smirk, waiting for me to shrink away. I didn't. I stood tall. I straightened my back, even though it creaked and groaned with every movement. I met her gaze with everything I had. "Excuse me, Megan," I said, my voice steady but fierce. "You're going to regret that one day, you know." Her eyes widened for a split second before she turned away, muttering under her breath. But I didn't care. The fire inside me was just beginning to burn. This is where it starts. This is where they'll all learn. You can ignore me. You can belittle me. But you can never underestimate me. I may be older, but I'm not dead. And I'll make them regret thinking I'm nothing more than a forgotten old lady. They've all forgotten who I am. But soon enough, they'll remember. It wasn't just the teenagers at Eagles Market that pushed me to the edge. That was just a glimpse, a small crack in the wall. No, the real trigger came later, at home, of all places. I had been living with James and Tina for a few months. I told myself it was just temporary, but deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't want me there. They didn't want me at all. I was a nuisance, a reminder of things they didn't want to deal with. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. I had always loved looking at those pictures, memories of better days, when things were simpler. James had just come back from his weekend trip, and Tina was in the other room, busy with her phone. As usual, they barely acknowledged me. "Hey, Mom," James said as he dropped his bag on the floor and grabbed a beer from the fridge. "I'm heading out with some friends. I'll be back later." I nodded, not wanting to cause any trouble. I was used to this by now. He'd come in and out, never really acknowledging I was there, except when it was time to ask for something, like money. But this time, something was different. I was tired of feeling like I was in the way, tired of being ignored. I needed to say something. I needed to make them understand that I wasn't going to sit quietly in the corner anymore. "James," I said, trying to sound casual, "could you give me a hand with something? I've been struggling with these forms, and I don't want to mess them up." He didn't even look at me. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began texting. "Maybe later, Mom. I've got things to do." I felt my heart sink. I wasn't asking for much, just a little help. But he didn't even care. Not even a glance. Tina came in, saw me sitting there, and barely acknowledged me. She was too busy with her own life, her own problems. It hit me all at once. The realization that I wasn't needed, that I wasn't wanted. It wasn't just that they were too busy for me. It was the way they looked at me, the way they acted like I didn't matter. They saw me as an inconvenience. They treated me like I was already invisible. I felt that familiar sting in my chest, the kind you get when you realize you've been forgotten. But I wasn't going to take it anymore. Not from my kids, not from anyone. I quietly closed the folder that held the forms and put it away. I took a deep breath. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about taking back what I deserved. They had no idea who I was anymore, but I was going to remind them. I went to the kitchen drawer and grabbed an old, rusted letter opener. It was a small thing, nothing special, but in that moment, it felt like the sharpest blade. I ran my fingers over the handle, feeling the cold metal against my skin. I knew I wasn't going to use it on anyone. No, I had something far more powerful in mind than violence. I wasn't going to get my hands dirty, but I was going to make them feel the weight of my anger. I was going to make them regret treating me like I was nothing. That night, I went to bed with a plan forming in my mind. A quiet storm was building, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. The world had forgotten me, but that was about to change. And I'd start with the people closest to me, the ones who should have known better. They would learn. They would learn to respect me again. But first, I had to act. This wasn't about getting even. This was about taking control. I've always been good at keeping my thoughts to myself. I wasn't the type to rant or shout. Not anymore. That's the thing about growing older. You learn to keep quiet, to watch, to listen. And when you're invisible like I've become, you get plenty of time to observe. In the weeks after that day in the kitchen, I did a lot of observing. I didn't jump into anything rash. No, I knew better than that. This wasn't going to be about a quick burst of anger. This was going to be calculated, strategic. I was going to make them feel the consequences of their actions, but I wasn't going to do it on my terms. James still came and went, acting like I wasn't even there. He'd talk to me only when he needed something, money, food, a favor, and then disappear. I could see the way he looked at me, like I was just a fixture in the house, like the furniture, something to be ignored. But I wasn't stupid. I could see the cracks in his life, the things he thought no one noticed, and I was going to use them. Then there was Tina. Her behavior had gotten worse. She hardly ever came over to visit anymore. When she did, it was a quick stop. She'd drop off groceries or ask me to watch her kids for a few hours while she went out. She didn't even bother to sit down and chat with me. I could see it now, more clearly than ever. She was embarrassed by me. The fact that I was still around, still needing things, it made her uncomfortable. She didn't know how to deal with me anymore. So she ignored me. That was the easiest way for her to deal with it. But I wasn't just sitting around waiting for them to realize how badly they were treating me. No, I was preparing. I was watching. I was gathering the pieces I needed to make them pay. They didn't know it yet, but they were all walking into my trap. Every time James or Tina came over, I made sure to be as helpful as possible. I ran errands. I cleaned the house. I even cooked their favorite meals, hoping they'd notice. But I also kept track of every little thing they said, every glance, every roll of their eyes. It didn't take long before I started to pick up on things. Small things. Tina's new car, the one she couldn't afford on her salary. James's increasing debt, the calls he was avoiding. They had their secrets, and they didn't even realize I was paying attention. I'd overhear snippets of conversation when they thought I wasn't listening. Tina had been complaining about her mortgage, how it was too high, how she couldn't keep up with payments. I smiled to myself when I heard her on the phone, promising her husband she'd figure it out. But I knew better. I knew that was a lie. She was drowning in debt, and it wouldn't take long before everything came crashing down. As for James, well, he'd been dodging calls from his creditors. I had seen the unopened bills stacked on his dresser, the way he threw them aside as if they would magically disappear. But they wouldn't. They were stacking up, and the walls were closing in. The more I learned, the clearer it became. They needed help, but they didn't know it. They didn't want my help. They didn't want anyone's help. But they were going to get it, whether they liked it or not. And I would be the one to deliver it. I wasn't going to just give them the money they needed. That would be too easy, too quick. I was going to make them feel the sting of their choices. They had turned their backs on me for too long, but now it was my turn to turn the tables. They thought I didn't know what was going on in their lives. They thought I was too old, too frail to understand. But I understood. And soon they would understand who they were messing with. I wasn't going to just take the abuse. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. It was time to make my move. My first move was small, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But that's the thing about revenge. Sometimes the most powerful moves are the ones that go unnoticed. I didn't need to make a spectacle of it. Not yet. I wanted to strike in a way that would make them wonder, make them question everything they thought they knew about me. It all started with Miss Green. She was the new manager at the local bank, a young woman with a polished smile and an attitude to match. She'd only been working there for a few months, but I already knew she didn't respect me. She looked at me the way everyone else did, like I was an inconvenience. The first time I noticed her, I was in the bank trying to sort out some paperwork. She walked right past me, her heels clicking loudly against the floor, and barely spared me a glance. I was waiting in line, but when she passed, she cut me off to assist a younger customer. I was invisible again. I felt that familiar sting in my chest, but instead of getting angry, I observed. I watched her interact with others, the way she would rush older customers along, dismissing them without a second thought. But the younger ones, she fawned over them. It was obvious. She was part of that new generation who saw the elderly as weak and useless. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I went back to the bank the next day, and this time I wasn't just going to let her treat me like I was nothing. I wasn't going to stand in line and wait for her to disregard me. No, I had a different plan in mind. I walked up to the counter, my shoes tapping against the floor, with purpose. I made sure she saw me, saw the confidence in my step. She smiled at me, forced, like she didn't really want to. "How can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her voice flat. "I need to speak with the manager," I said, looking her right in the eye. I have some concerns about your recent treatment of elderly customers. It's been brought to my attention that you're not following proper protocol. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. I'm the manager, ma'am, she replied, clearly irritated. Is there something specific you'd like to discuss? I knew she was about to dismiss me, but I didn't let her. Yes, I said, I'd like to speak to your superior about your behavior. If you're too busy, I can wait. I handed her a letter I'd written, an official-looking complaint about the way she'd treated me and others. I made sure to include specific examples. Things she'd said, the way she'd acted. I could see her face flush as she read the letter. It didn't take long for her to realize that I wasn't going to back down. She looked around nervously, trying to gauge whether anyone else was paying attention. But they were. The other customers had started to notice, and I could see the subtle nods of approval from some of them. When she finally spoke, it was with forced politeness. I apologize for any inconvenience, ma'am. I will make sure to address this with my team. I smiled inwardly. This wasn't just about making her apologize. It was about showing her that I wasn't someone she could brush off. She'd taken me for granted, but now she was the one who was uncomfortable. She was the one who had to answer for her actions. I left the bank that day with a sense of satisfaction. It was small, almost unnoticeable to most, but to Ms. Green, it was a lesson, and it would stick with her. The next time she saw an elderly person walk into that bank, she'd remember me. She'd remember that we weren't to be underestimated. After Ms. Green learned her lesson, I knew it wasn't time to stop. No, the game had just begun. One small victory wasn't enough for me. I had to keep going, building my plan piece by piece, until everyone who had ever underestimated me would feel the weight of their actions. I started noticing more things, more cracks in the lives of the people who thought they could ignore me. My children, my neighbors, even strangers. They all had secrets, weaknesses, things they didn't want anyone to know. And I was going to make sure they were exposed. I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't about to let anyone see what I was doing. That's the beauty of revenge. It's most powerful when it's done quietly, when people don't even know they're being played. And that's exactly how I worked. Every day, I watched, I listened, and I waited. James, my son, was still the same, always rushing around, avoiding anything that might inconvenience him. He still didn't have time for me, but that didn't matter anymore. I was no longer going to beg for his attention. Instead, I watched him struggle, watched the small cracks in his life that he thought he could hide. It wasn't hard to see that he was in debt, drowning in bills he couldn't pay. Every time I went into his room, I'd find unopened letters, creditors, banks, payday loans. He thought I didn't notice, but I did. One afternoon, I took a trip to the bank, just a regular errand, or so they thought. I had no intention of going there to deal with my own finances, but rather I was going to put my hands on something that would give me power over James. I knew exactly where his financial trouble was buried. He'd signed up for a loan, one that had a very high interest rate. I'd overheard him talking about it once, how he was getting some easy money from Sam, the local payday lender. I walked into that bank, acting as if I was there for something trivial. I requested to speak to a teller I knew, someone who had always treated me with respect. "Hello, Linda, I need a favor. I was hoping to get some information on a loan agreement. One of my children, James, has some financial problems. I think he may have been misled when he signed for a loan." Linda hesitated for a moment. She knew who James was, and she knew I didn't usually ask for help like this. But after a moment, she agreed to help me out. She dug up the records, and I couldn't help but smile. There it was, proof that James had taken out a loan with Sam at an outrageous interest rate, a loan that was going to bury him deeper and deeper. I took the paperwork she handed me and tucked it away carefully in my purse. I didn't say a word to James that day. I didn't need to. He would find out soon enough. But when he did, it would be too late. I had already planned my next move. Now, it was time to use this information. I wasn't going to give him the money to pay off the debt. That would be too easy. Instead, I was going to let him feel the full consequences of his careless decisions. Sam was a local businessman, but not the type you'd want to get involved with. I knew he had connections, and he had a way of making people's lives miserable when they defaulted on loans. I planned to send James straight to Sam, armed with nothing but his own guilt. But Tina wasn't off the hook either. I'd been noticing her, too. Her life wasn't as perfect as she liked to make it seem. She was constantly stressed about money, but always too proud to ask for help. The new car she drove, an expensive piece of junk she couldn't afford, was just the tip of the iceberg. I had noticed how she'd been avoiding phone calls from bill collectors and how she'd started pulling away from her responsibilities. I had a feeling that her mortgage was due for a nasty surprise, but I needed more information. So one day, when she was at work, I went through some of her old documents she'd left lying around. I wasn't proud of it, but at this point, I couldn't afford to feel guilty. I had to act, and that meant doing whatever it took. I found the mortgage papers tucked away in a drawer. The interest rate was sky high, and she was barely making the minimum payments. One missed payment, and she could lose the house. It was only a matter of time before the bank started sending warnings. And Tina, proud, stubborn Tina, would never ask for help. That was when I decided to act. I wasn't going to give her a hand, not yet, but I knew exactly what would make her panic. I reached out to an old friend, someone who used to work in collections, and had them send a very official-looking letter to Tina, warning her about the potential for foreclosure. The letter didn't need to be real, it just needed to be convincing. And it worked. I saw Tina's reaction the moment she opened the letter. The fear, the panic. I could feel a strange sense of satisfaction wash over me. I didn't need to do anything more. The fear was enough to set the wheels in motion. The walls were closing in around James and Tina, and I could see it happening. Slowly but surely, they were starting to feel the weight of their choices. Every little thing I'd done, every decision, every piece of information I'd gathered, was starting to fall into place. The best part, they had no idea it was all connected. As I watched them struggle, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. James kept avoiding calls, and Tina spent her days frantically checking her bank account, watching her savings dwindle. But they were too proud to admit they were sinking. Instead, they kept pretending everything was fine, acting like they had everything under control. But I knew better. I knew they were drowning. And now I was ready to strike again. It wasn't just James and Tina who were in my sights. No, I had my eyes on a few other people who'd wronged me over the years. Nancy, a former coworker who'd always acted like she was better than me, was high on the list. She was the type of woman who would talk down to anyone she thought was beneath her, and she'd done it to me on more than one occasion. I'd had enough of her smug attitude. I knew Nancy had started her own business, something small but successful. She was the kind of person who bragged about every little accomplishment, but I knew she wasn't as perfect as she thought. Her business, I'd heard, was in trouble. She'd been skirting some tax issues, and a few of her clients were unhappy with her service. The word on the street was that she was barely keeping things afloat, but she was too proud to ask for help. So I made my move. I found out that Nancy had been using an old tax loophole to avoid paying some of her dues, and I knew exactly where to send the information. I contacted an old acquaintance of mine at the IRS, someone I'd known for years. I didn't need to get my hands dirty. I just needed to send the right information to the right person. I didn't have to say anything. The authorities would take care of the rest. I wasn't just targeting Nancy to make her life harder, though. No, this was about more than that. It was about showing everyone who thought they were untouchable that they were wrong. Nancy had spent too many years walking around with her nose in the air, acting like she was superior to everyone else. Well, now she was going to learn that no one is above the law. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about how this would play out. The IRS would investigate her business, and soon enough, it would all come crashing down. She would be forced to answer for her actions, just like the rest of them. But I wasn't finished with her yet. James and Tina were next in line for their wake-up call. I had already set things in motion with James's debt, and the threat from Sam, the payday lender, was starting to feel real. I could see him avoiding Sam's calls, his stress mounting, but he still didn't know I was the one who had orchestrated it all. And then there was Tina. Her panic over the foreclosure notice had sent was reaching its peak. I knew she had started contacting the bank, trying to negotiate, but I had made sure that nothing would go in her favor. The more she scrambled, the deeper she sank. I knew she'd eventually have to come to me for help, but that was exactly what I was waiting for. I wasn't going to help her, not until she understood what she had done to me, not until she realized that the woman she had ignored all these years had more power than she ever imagined. I spent my days watching the slow-motion train wreck unfold, the subtle ways their lives were beginning to crumble. James was losing his confidence. Tina was losing her grip on her life. And Nancy was just about to lose everything. I knew it wasn't going to be long before they all came crawling back to me. They were going to need something from me, something I could hold over their heads. And when they did, I would be ready. They thought they could treat me like I was worthless, but now they were going to see what happens when you push someone too far. I could feel it, the power. It was a quiet, almost intoxicating thing. Every little piece of the puzzle I'd set in motion was starting to fall into place, and I was savoring the moment. For years, I had been dismissed, ignored, overlooked. But now, everything was changing. James couldn't avoid his creditors anymore. The calls from Sam were getting more aggressive. I could almost hear the panic in his voice when he called me to ask if I could help him with some loose ends. He didn't know it yet, but he had just walked into my trap. James had always thought I was weak. He thought I was just some old woman who couldn't keep up with the world. But the truth was, I had been watching him for a long time. I knew everything about his financial struggles, his failed investments, the debt he had accumulated over the years. And now it was my turn to watch him squirm. I didn't give him a penny, not a single dime. And I knew that by the time Sam showed up at his door, James would wish he had never crossed me. He'd never be able to shake off that feeling of helplessness, of knowing that the very person he thought he could ignore was the one who had caused his downfall. But the true satisfaction came from watching Tina. She had always been the golden child, the one who had everything figured out. She thought she could get away with anything, but now she was starting to crack. The foreclosure notice I had sent her was starting to hit home. I saw her the other day, nervously rifling through her paperwork, biting her lip in that way she always did when she was stressed. I could feel her panic rising, but she still refused to come to me for help. That was the beauty of it. She knew I had the power to fix everything, but she didn't want to admit she had failed. She didn't want to admit she needed me. The pride that kept her from asking for help was also the thing that was going to destroy her. Every day, I watched her struggle. The calls from the bank were coming in more frequently now. She would answer them, but the fear was evident in her voice. And yet, she still hadn't come to me. She was too proud to admit defeat, and I wasn't going to make it easy for her. It was the same with Nancy. I could see it in her eyes the last time we crossed paths. Her arrogance had vanished. She no longer looked at me with that smug, condescending expression. No, now she was the one looking over her shoulder, wondering who knew her secrets. I could already imagine the panic setting in as the IRS started sniffing around her business. She wasn't the same Nancy anymore. I had shattered her confidence, made her realize that she wasn't untouchable. The perfect little life she had been living was about to come crashing down, and I was going to make sure of it. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, and the more I watched them struggle, the more I reveled in it. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. I was no longer invisible, no longer weak. I had a hand in every decision, every move they made. They were all tangled in my web, and they had no idea how tightly it was closing around them. The best part? They didn't know what was coming next. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. But in this moment, I could enjoy the power I had gained. For too long, I had been the one who was overlooked, ignored, and dismissed. But now, they were the ones who were afraid. They were the ones who couldn't escape. I almost didn't notice what was happening right under my nose. It wasn't until one fateful afternoon that I realized just how deep the betrayal went. And this time, it was personal. I had always trusted my daughter. Tina had been the one who called me, worried about my health when I fell ill a few years ago. She'd promised to take care of me, to make sure I had everything I needed. She said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. But just as with everything else, that promise had faded away over time. I had become a burden in her eyes, a weight on her shoulders. And I could feel it, but I didn't say anything. I never complained. But the betrayal I felt when I found out about Tina's secret, well, that was something I couldn't ignore. It happened when I was going through some old family documents. Nothing unusual. I wasn't snooping, just going through some papers that needed sorting. And that's when I found it. A piece of paper hidden at the bottom of one of her old files, crumpled and folded like she had tried to keep it out of sight. It was a letter from a lawyer. At first, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Tina had been planning to sell the house I had helped her buy, the house that I had helped her pay for. She had been scheming behind my back, arranging everything to ensure that I would be out in the cold. The plan was set. She'd sell it and pocket the money, leaving me with nothing. I was just a footnote in her plans. I stared at the letter for what seemed like hours. My mind was racing, the sting of betrayal searing through me. She had gone behind my back and made arrangements to sell the very place I had helped her make a home. I couldn't believe it. The daughter who had promised to take care of me. She was the one who was planning to throw me away like yesterday's trash. I thought about how she had come over to visit so often, making small talk, pretending everything was fine, all the while planning my eviction. I had trusted her. She was supposed to be the one person I could count on. And this was how she repaid me. But this wasn't the end. Oh no, this betrayal wasn't just the final straw. It was the spark that ignited the fire. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to let her tear everything I had built down. She had chosen her path, and now she would face the consequences. I wouldn't let her manipulate me any longer. I waited for the right moment, knowing that everything would fall apart if I played my cards right. It wasn't about getting even. It was about showing her who had the power. It was about making sure she felt the weight of her choices, making her understand what it meant to betray someone who had always had her back. I didn't confront her immediately. No, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry. Instead, I bided my time, letting her believe that she had gotten away with it. Let her think she was in control. But I was always a step ahead. She didn't know it yet, but her betrayal had sealed her fate. The next time Tina came to visit, I had already made my move. I wasn't going to let her think she could take everything from me without facing the consequences. And as for James, well, he had no idea what was about to happen next. His financial situation was already spiraling, but this was going to be the moment he truly realized how badly he had misjudged me. The moment he realized I was done being the victim. I had finally crossed the point of no return. No more turning the other cheek. No more pretending like I didn't matter. The moment Tina walked through the door that day, I knew everything had changed. She was pretending like nothing had happened, giving me her usual practice smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She asked me how I was doing, acting like I hadn't just uncovered the secret she had been hiding behind my back. But I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the way her hands shook ever so slightly as she adjusted her purse. She knew I knew. She could feel it, even if I hadn't said a word yet. I let her talk. I let her go through the motions, her voice sweet and soft as she asked if I needed anything. But inside, I was already making my move. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. I waited until she was settled on the couch before I said it, my voice steady but full of purpose. So, Tina, I began, watching her stiffen just slightly at the sound of my tone. I was going through some old documents earlier today and found something interesting. Her eyes flickered. She didn't answer, but I could see her tense up. I knew she was trying to figure out how much I knew. I didn't know you were planning on selling the house. I continued, letting the words hang in the air like a heavy weight. I didn't know you were planning to leave me with nothing after everything I've done for you. And I didn't know you were so willing to betray your own mother. Her face paled, but she quickly regained her composure. Mom, but I wasn't about to let her spin this. Not anymore. I stood up, slowly, deliberately, my cane tapping against the floor with every step. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker, as I towered over her. You're not going to get away with this, Tina, I said coldly. You think you can take everything from me, sell the house, and just walk away? No, you're going to regret this, and I'm going to make sure you do. Her eyes widened as she stood up, but I wasn't done yet. I had a plan in motion that she didn't know about, a plan that would send her reeling just like James had been. You're not getting away with this, I repeated, my voice low but firm. I've already made sure of that. James was my next target, and I wasn't going to hold back. I knew exactly where his weaknesses lay. I knew about his debt, about the lies he had been living to cover it up. I knew the pressure he was under to pay Sam back, and I knew exactly how to make it worse. I had Sam's number, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I called him up that very night, knowing full well that James would be waking up to a world of problems. Sam didn't hesitate for a moment when I mentioned James's name. The sound of that conversation, the quick agreement, the terms discussed so casually, sent a thrill through me. James was going to learn the hard way that no one ever truly escapes their debts. By the time Tina realized what I had done, it was already too late. The deal had been sealed. James would feel the full brunt of his actions, and she would watch it happen. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about the years of neglect, the years of pretending that everything was fine, while I was the one left to clean up the mess. I wasn't afraid of losing everything anymore, because I had already lost it all once, and it hadn't broken me, but it would break them. The reckoning had come, and they weren't going to like the outcome. The storm was coming, and I could feel it in the air. The fallout from my actions wasn't going to be pretty, but I was ready. I had waited long enough, and now the pieces were falling into place. The lives I had quietly set into motion were beginning to crack wide open, and I could do nothing but watch as the chaos unfolded. James called me the next morning, his voice shaky, panicked. He didn't know what was happening, but he could feel it. Sam had made his move. The calls were already coming in from collectors. James had always thought he could escape his debt, but I had made sure that wouldn't happen. He was going to feel the weight of his bad decisions now. "Mom, I need your help," he begged, his voice a mix of desperation and anger. "I don't know what's going on, but I can't handle this anymore. The creditors, Sam, they're coming after me. Please, you have to do something." I let him talk, listening to his pleas. But inside I was smiling. He had no idea that I was the one who had orchestrated it all. He thought he could get away with his reckless choices, but now he was learning the hard way that the past always catches up. I had warned him in my own way. He thought I was weak. He thought I was harmless. "James," I said, my voice cold and firm, "you've made your bed. Now you're going to lie in it." He didn't understand. He couldn't, and he wouldn't. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't going to bail him out. I wasn't going to save him from the consequences. He had betrayed me for too long. As for Tina, I had already seen the cracks in her armor. She was trying so hard to hold it together, to keep up the illusion that everything was fine. But I knew better. She was sinking. Fast. I overheard her talking to her husband on the phone the other day, her voice frantic, as she tried to negotiate with the bank. She was losing her grip on everything. The foreclosure was no longer just a threat. It was real. And she had no idea what to do. She still hadn't come to me. Not yet. I knew she was too proud to ask for help, too embarrassed to admit that she had failed. But she would have no choice. Soon, she'd realize that I was the only one who could fix things for her. And when she came to me, begging for forgiveness, I would be ready. But I wouldn't make it easy for her. Not this time. The satisfaction of watching them struggle was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what had always been mine. The respect, the power, the control. I had given so much of myself to them over the years, and they had taken it all for granted. Now, they were paying the price. Nancy, too, was feeling the heat. The IRS had finally shown up at her door, and she was scrambling to cover her tracks. I could almost hear the panic in her voice when she called me the other day, asking if I had heard anything. She knew the walls were closing in, but she didn't know who had set it all in motion. She didn't know that I had been the one to send the tip to the authorities. She tried to keep her composure, but I could hear the fear in her voice as she asked, "Do you know anything about an investigation into my business? Is there something I should know?" I didn't answer her right away. I let her sweat. I knew she was already imagining the worst-case scenario, wondering how she would get out of this one. But she wasn't going to get out. Not this time. I had made sure of it. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control, showing them who I really was. For too long, I had let them walk all over me, let them ignore me, belittle me. But now, I was the one pulling the strings. They were the ones who were afraid. As I sat back and watched their lives unravel, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. I had done what I set out to do. I had taken everything from them. And now they were going to learn the hard way that no one can get away with treating me like I'm nothing. It had all come down to this. The final pieces of the puzzle were in place, and there was no turning back. James, Tina, and Nancy had all been slowly crushed under the weight of their own mistakes. Now, it was time for me to deliver the finishing blow. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was in control. The satisfaction I had felt as I watched them struggle, as I watched their lives begin to unravel, was nothing compared to the power I felt now. I had orchestrated every moment of their downfall, and now I was ready to confront them face to face. I waited for Tina to finally come crawling back to me. I had known she would, eventually, The foreclosure on her house had come through, and she had no one left to turn to. She had spent weeks pretending she had everything under control, but now the truth was undeniable. The house would be sold, and she would be forced to find somewhere else to live. She came over one evening, her face pale, her eyes tired. It was as if she had aged 10 years in the span of a few weeks. I could see the desperation in her eyes as she tried to smile at me, but it was forced, hollow. "Mom," she started, her voice cracking, I need your help." I didn't say a word at first. I just watched her, letting her stew in her guilt, in the reality of what she had done. She sat down across from me, wringing her hands together, her eyes darting around the room. She couldn't meet my gaze. She couldn't bear to look me in the eye after everything she had done. "I don't know what to do," she continued. "I've lost everything. The house, the bank, it's all falling apart. I thought I could fix it, but now it's too late." I could feel the power surging within me. She had no idea how much I had already set into motion. She thought she was still in control, but she wasn't. She had made her decision long ago, and now it was time for me to make mine. "You're not getting anything from me, Tina," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "You betrayed me. You've been planning to throw me out for months, and now you want my help." Her face crumpled as the tears began to fall, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I had no sympathy left for her. She had made her choices, and now she was going to have to live with the consequences. I didn't know what else to do," she sobbed. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see how much I've hurt you. It was too little, too late. The betrayal had already been set in motion, and I had already moved on. I wasn't going to offer her any redemption. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking I'd forgive her. I don't care what you thought, Tina," I said firmly. "You chose to turn your back on me. Now, you'll face the consequences, just like James and Nancy." I stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the world beyond. It was a calm evening, the sun setting behind the horizon. The world outside was peaceful, but in here, the storm was brewing. "Tina," I said, turning back to face her, "you've lost everything, and you'll never get it back." She looked up at me, the last shred of hope in her eyes fading away. There was nothing left for her, nothing but the consequences of her actions. And I was going to make sure she remembered that. The pieces had all fallen into place. There was nothing left to do but watch as the last dominoes tumbled as James, Tina, and Nancy faced the final consequences of their actions. I had set this in motion, and now I was going to sit back and enjoy the results. When you've been overlooked for as long as I have, when you've been treated like a ghost, you learn how to play the long game. They never saw it coming, and by the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. James had spiraled out of control. The calls from Sam had only gotten worse. He had no way out. His debts were suffocating him, and there was nothing he could do. I had watched him make every mistake, every bad decision, and now the weight of it all was crashing down on him. I could feel his frustration every time he called, begging for a way out, but I knew there was no escaping the mess he had created. I never picked up the phone. I didn't need to. James had to face his mistakes, just like Tina had to face hers. Tina had tried to salvage what was left, but I had already seen the cracks in her resolve. She had lost the house. The foreclosure was final. She had nowhere to go, and she was still too proud to come to me to ask for help. She hadn't learned her lesson. She never would. And Nancy? She thought she was untouchable. The IRS had already filed their charges. Her business was falling apart, and there was no way she could hide behind her wealth anymore. The facade had cracked. I could almost hear the panic in her voice the last time we spoke. She had no idea that I had been the one who set everything in motion. She thought she was invincible, but now she was just another victim of her own arrogance. I watched all of them suffer. It was sweet in a way. The chaos they had caused in my life, the disrespect, the neglect, it had all come back to them tenfold. They had never believed I could do this. They had never imagined that I would be the one to bring them down. Now, as I sat in my chair, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The revenge wasn't just about hurting them. It was about regaining my power, about showing them that I was not someone to be ignored. I wasn't just a frail old woman. I was a force to be reckoned with. I had no regrets. None. I had given them everything, my love, my time, my support, and they had thrown it all away. But now they had nothing. I had made sure of that. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the silence. It was over. The war had been fought, and I had won. But it wasn't just the victory that brought me peace. It was the knowledge that I had taken control of my own life, my own destiny. I had refused to let them define me, to treat me like I was invisible. I had risen from the ashes of neglect and betrayal, and I had come out on top. I wasn't just an elderly woman anymore. I was a force of nature, and no one would ever forget the lesson I had taught them.